In a modest garage on the outskirts of town, where the scent of motor oil mingles with hope, Mike Harrison wipes grease from his calloused hands. For 20 years, he's fixed everything from tractors to luxury cars, earning just enough to keep his lights on. But today is different. Today, he stands before Sarah Montgomery, a desperate mother whose wealth couldn't prevent her daughter's tragic accident. Her voice trembles as she admits defeat after countless failed treatments. Mike looks at the young girl in the wheelchair, then at his workbench covered in spare parts and half-finished projects. His mind already racing with possibilities, he speaks words that will change both their lives forever. "I can make your daughter walk." Could a simple mechanic's ingenuity accomplish what million-dollar medical treatments couldn't? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mike Harrison's day always began the same way, with the creak of his father's old toolbox opening. The red metal case, scratched and dented from 3 decades of service, held more than just wrenches and screwdrivers. It carried the weight of a legacy, each tool telling its own story of problems solved and machines brought back to life. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Harrison's auto repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Mike traced his fingers along the worn edges of the toolbox, remembering the day his father had placed it in his hands. "Everything can be fixed, son," James Harrison had said, "if you've got the right tools and enough heart." Those words had guided Mike through 20 years of fixing everything from farm equipment to foreign sports cars. The shop itself was a testament to Mike's philosophy, organized chaos that made perfect sense to its owner. Shelves lined with salvage parts reached toward the ceiling, each component carefully labeled and categorized. What others saw as junk, Mike saw as potential. A discarded servo motor might become part of a custom window lift. A scrapped laptop could donate its cooling fan to a vintage car's climate control system. In one corner stood his pride and joy, a workbench dedicated to his special projects. Here, among the soldering irons and microcontrollers, Mike spent his evenings tinkering with ideas that went beyond simple car repair. A half-finished robotic arm lay beside a stack of technical manuals, its exposed circuitry telling the story of countless late nights spent learning and experimenting. The local paper had once called him the MacGyver of Main Street, a nickname that made him chuckle but held more truth than they knew. Mike's reputation had been built not just on fixing what was broken, but on finding innovative solutions when conventional repairs wouldn't cut it. When old Mr. Peterson's arthritis made it impossible to turn his truck's manual steering wheel, Mike had crafted a custom power steering system from spare parts. For Widow Jenkins' ancient washing machine, he'd designed a simplified control panel with large, easy-to-read buttons. These projects never made him rich. Most of his clients were working folks who paid what they could. Some weeks, the income barely covered his expenses, but Mike measured wealth differently than most. His father had taught him that true value lay in the satisfaction of solving problems, in the gratitude of those he helped, and in the knowledge that his skills made a difference in his community. The morning's first customer pulled into the lot, Tom Chen's delivery van, probably another alternator issue. Mike reached for his diagnostic scanner, a modern concession in his otherwise old-school toolkit. As he walked out to greet Tom, his mind wandered to the small robotics project waiting on his workbench. Something about the servo motor's range of motion wasn't quite right, and he had a theory about how to fix it. That was the thing about being a mechanic in the modern age. You had to keep learning, keep adapting. The tools in his father's box were still essential, but they weren't enough anymore. Cars had become computers on wheels, and fixing them required as much coding knowledge as mechanical skill. Mike had embraced this evolution, spending countless hours studying electronics and programming through online courses and technical manuals. Each new skill he acquired became another tool in his arsenal, another way to solve problems that others deemed impossible. It wasn't always easy, balancing the day-to-day demands of running a repair shop with his drive to innovate. But Mike had learned long ago that the most worthwhile things in life rarely came easy. As he popped the hood of Tom's van, the familiar scent of motor oil and metal filled his nostrils. Another day of fixing things was beginning. What challenges it would bring, he couldn't know. But with his father's toolbox behind him and a mind full of possibilities, Mike Harrison was ready to face them all. Sarah Montgomery sat in her home office, staring at the thick medical file that documented her daughter's journey. The manila folder, stuffed with reports, X-rays and specialist recommendations, had grown heavier with each passing month. She pulled out the most recent evaluation, its crisp pages a stark contrast to the worn edges of earlier documents. The accident had happened 18 months ago, a routine drive home from Emily's dance recital, her last dance recital. Sarah could still hear the screech of tires, still see the headlights coming too fast through the rain. The airbags had protected them from the worst of it, but Emily's spinal cord injury had changed everything in an instant. At 12 years old, Emily had been a whirlwind of energy and grace. Dancing was her passion, and she'd spent every spare moment practicing in the studio they'd converted from their guest room. Now that room stood silent, its mirrors reflecting only memories of pirouettes and arabesques. The first few months had been a blur of hospitals, surgeries, and rehabilitation centers. Sarah had thrown her considerable resources at the problem, consulting specialists across the country. Her position as CEO of Montgomery Technologies gave her access to the best medical care money could buy. But after countless procedures and experimental treatments, the prognosis remained unchanged. Emily would never walk again. Sarah closed the file and walked to the window. From here, she could see the garden, where Emily used to chase butterflies. The groundskeeper still maintained it perfectly, but no footprints marked the grass between the flower beds anymore. Emily's wheelchair left only parallel tracks on the paved paths. The hardest part wasn't the medical bills or the home modifications or even the endless hours of physical therapy. It was watching the light in Emily's eyes dim with each passing month. Her daughter, once so full of dreams about becoming a professional dancer, now spent hours sitting at her window, watching other children play. They'd tried to adapt. Emily had started taking art classes, finding a new way to express herself through painting. She'd even won recognition in a local youth art competition. But Sarah knew her daughter well enough to see the sadness behind her smiles, to recognize the way her hands would sometimes move in remembered dance steps while she slept. Last week's visit to Dr. Richardson had been the final straw. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Montgomery," he'd said, his voice gentle but firm. "We've explored every conventional treatment available. At this point, we need to focus on quality of life and accepting the reality of Emily's condition." Accepting reality had never been Sarah's strong suit. She hadn't accepted reality when people said a single mother couldn't run a tech company. She hadn't accepted reality when investors doubted her vision for sustainable energy solutions. And she refused to accept reality now, when it meant watching her daughter's dreams slip away. Yesterday, she'd overheard Emily talking to her best friend on the phone. "Maybe Mum should stop trying so hard," Emily had said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's hurting her too." The words had struck Sarah like physical blows. Her daughter, her beautiful, brave girl, was trying to protect her mother's feelings by giving up hope. Sarah gathered the medical file and placed it back in her desk drawer. Tomorrow, they had an appointment with yet another specialist, this one recommended by her company's head of research and development. She hadn't told Emily about it. What was the point of raising hopes that would likely be dashed again? As she prepared to leave her office for the day, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message. It was from her assistant, passing along an interesting rumor. Apparently, there was a mechanic on the other side of town who had been creating custom mobility solutions for people with disabilities. The message included a photo of an elderly man using a modified walker that looked nothing like any medical device Sarah had ever seen. She almost dismissed it immediately. What could a mechanic possibly offer that the country's top medical specialists couldn't? But something made her hesitate. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the memory of Emily's whispered words. Or maybe it was time to try something, anything different. Sarah saved the mechanic's address to her phone. Harrison's Auto Repair. She would check it out herself first, before mentioning anything to Emily. After all, she had nothing left to lose but hope itself. The sleek black Tesla looked out of place among the weathered pickup trucks and practical sedans in Mike's parking lot. He watched through the garage's open door as a woman in a tailored business suit emerged from the driver's seat, her heels clicking purposefully on the concrete. The back door opened, and she helped a young girl into a wheelchair that probably cost more than Mike's entire tool collection. The wheelchair itself was a marvel of engineering: carbon fiber frame, motorized assists and electronic controls that looked more sophisticated than most car computers. But what caught Mike's attention wasn't the technology, it was the way. The girl's fingers absently tapped out a rhythm on the armrest, like a dancer marking time. "Mr. Harrison," the woman's voice carried the polished tone of someone used to commanding boardrooms. "I'm Sarah Montgomery. I understand you sometimes work on unusual projects." Mike wiped his hands on a shop rag, buying time to study them. Both. The mother's stance was protective, her expression a carefully maintained mask of professional detachment. But her eyes held the desperate hope he'd seen in so many parents who'd sought his help over the years. The girl, she had to be. Emily sat with the kind of stillness that seemed unnatural in someone so young. Her wheelchair might have been state-of-the-art, but to Mike's trained eye, it was also a cage, restricting movement rather than enabling it. "That's right," he answered finally, "though I usually work on simpler things than what you've got there." He gestured to the wheelchair. "That's some pretty impressive engineering." Emily's hand stilled on the armrest. "It doesn't matter how impressive it is," she said quietly. "It's still just a chair." The bitterness in her voice cut through the garage's usual atmosphere of oil and metal. Mike found himself moving closer, crouching down to meet her eye level. "You know, sometimes the fanciest solution isn't the right one. Sometimes you need to think differently about the problem." Sarah stepped forward. "Mr. Harrison, I'll be direct. I've heard about some of your modifications. The walker you made for Mr. Peterson, the custom controls for Mrs. Jenkins. I know this is different, but—" "Mom," Emily interrupted, a hint of embarrassment in her voice. "He fixes cars. He can't." "Fix me?" Mike stood slowly, his knees protesting the movement. He walked to his workbench, running his fingers over the scattered components of his latest project. The servo motors he'd been struggling with that morning suddenly seemed to click into place in his mind, their potential realigning with this new challenge. "You're right," he said, turning back to them. "I can't fix you, but maybe I can build something that helps you move the way you want to move." He pulled out his sketchpad, already making rough calculations. The human body is just a kind of machine when you think about it, and every machine can be enhanced. Emily's eyes widened slightly, the first spark of interest he'd seen in them. Sarah's professional facade cracked, revealing the worried mother beneath. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Mike grabbed a pencil and began sketching. "An exoskeleton. But not like the medical ones you've probably seen. Something lighter, more responsive. Instead of trying to override your body's movements, it would amplify them. Even the smallest muscle control could be translated into large emotions." He showed them the rough sketch, taking shape on the page. "See, the problem with most medical devices is they try to do all the work. But from what I can see, you've got some movement. We just need to make it count for more." Sarah studied the drawing, her business training warring with maternal hope. "This isn't conventional." "No," Mike agreed. "But conventional hasn't worked so far, has it?" Emily wheeled herself closer to the workbench, looking at the scattered parts with new interest. Would it hurt? No, Mike said firmly. And the first sign of discomfort, we stop and redesign. That's the advantage of custom work. We can adjust everything until it's exactly right for you. He met Sarah's questioning gaze. I'm not promising miracles, but I think I can help Emily walk again. Not like before, maybe, but her own way. The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Through the open garage door, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows, and somewhere in the distance, a church. Bell chimed. It was a moment balanced on the edge of change, waiting for someone to take the first step forward. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice stronger than before. When can we start? Long after the Tesla's taillights had disappeared into the evening darkness, Mike sat at his workbench, surrounded by open technical manuals and scattered sketches. His notebook, its pages dog-eared and coffee-stained, lay open before him. The top page showed dozens of iterations of leg joint designs, each one crossed out and redrawn with subtle modifications. The desk lamp cast a warm circle of light around him, while the rest of the garage settled into shadows. In the quiet, his pencil scratched against paper as he worked out the mechanics of his promise. Every so often, he'd pause to reference one of the medical textbooks he'd borrowed from the local library. Anatomy wasn't his usual subject, but the principles weren't so different from automotive systems when you got down to it. Force distribution, he muttered, erasing a line and redrawing it at a slightly different angle. It's all about force distribution. The human leg was an incredibly efficient machine, he'd learned. Trying to replicate its natural movement with external supports would require careful balance between power and precision. He reached for his father's old notebook, bound in cracked leather and filled with handwritten notes from decades of repair work. Among the engine diagrams and parts lists, he found what he was looking for. Sketches of a custom transmission he'd designed for a client's vintage motorcycle. The principles of power transfer were similar, though the scale would be dramatically different. Mike flipped to a fresh page and began a new drawing. This time, instead of trying to design around Emily's paralysis, he focused on amplifying her existing capabilities. The servo motors that had been giving him trouble that morning could be perfect for this. With the right programming, they could detect and enhance even minimal muscle movement. The design took shape under his pencil, a framework of lightweight, aluminum and carbon fiber, articulated joints powered by miniature motors, and a network of sensors to read Emily's muscle signals. It would be expensive, but he could salvage some components from old projects and others. Well, he'd figure something out. Hours slipped by as he worked. The coffee in his mug grew cold, forgotten as he lost himself in calculations and sketches. Each component had to be perfect. There was no room for error when dealing with someone's mobility, someone's dreams. Around midnight, he sat back and studied the final design. It wasn't pretty. Form had taken a distant second place to function, but it looked workable. More importantly, it looked adaptable. Every joint could be adjusted, every motor's response customized to Emily's needs. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of the sketch, then began making a list of needed materials. Some he had on hand, others he'd need to source carefully. The motors would be the biggest challenge. They needed to be powerful enough to support movement, but small enough to fit comfortably on a child's frame. Mike glanced at the clock and grimaced. He had a full day of regular repairs scheduled. Tomorrow, starting in just a few hours. But as he began tidying up his workspace, his eyes kept returning to the blueprint. In his mind, he could already see Emily taking her first steps with the device, could imagine the look on her face when she realized what her body could still do. He grabbed a fresh piece of paper and began making a second list. Clients whose repairs could wait a day or two, parts he could sell to fund the project, favors he could call in from suppliers. This wouldn't be like his usual side projects, tinkering with improvements in his spare time. This needed to be his priority. The notebook's final sketch showed the complete system, a sleek exoskeleton that would extend from Emily's hips to her ankles, with carefully placed supports and joints that would work with her body rather than trying to control it. In the margin, he'd written his father's old motto, "Everything can be fixed." Mike carefully closed the notebook and placed it in his toolbox. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, explaining the design to Sarah and Emily, beginning the lengthy process of construction, dealing with the inevitable setbacks and adjustments. But for now, in the quiet of his garage, he had what he needed, a plan, a purpose, and the first steps toward keeping his promise. The box of salvaged robotics parts sat on Mike's workbench like a jigsaw puzzle waiting to be solved. Each component told its own story: servo motors from a defunct assembly line, control boards from discarded gaming consoles, sensors that once guided warehouse robots. To most people, it was technological trash. To Mike, it was possibility in physical form. "You're really serious about this, aren't you?" Tom Chen leaned against the garage doorframe, eyeing the scattered parts. He'd arrived early with his usual delivery of Chinese takeout, a Friday tradition that dated back to when Mike had fixed his first van for half the usual rate. "Dead serious," Mike replied, carefully testing a motor's response. "I've got most of the frame materials, but these electronic components are trickier. They need to be precise, reliable." Tom nodded thoughtfully, then pulled out his phone. "My cousin works at that robotics factory in Cedar Rapids, the one that's switching to new production lines. Let me make a call." Word spread through the community like oil through an engine, smooth and unstoppable. By the end of the week, Mike's garage had become a depot for technological cast-offs. Mr. Peterson brought in his grandson's old drone motors. Mrs. Jenkins contributed precise servo controllers from her late husband's model airplane collection. Even the high school robotics team stopped by, offering spare parts and eager assistance. But it wasn't just components that flowed in. Knowledge came with them, carried on the voices of people who understood pieces of the puzzle Mike was trying to solve. The robotics team's advisor spent an evening explaining the latest advances in motion control algorithms. A retired physical therapist brought detailed diagrams of muscle groups and gait patterns. Mike catalogued each contribution carefully, his mind constantly recalculating and adjusting his designs. Some parts wouldn't work, others opened new possibilities he hadn't considered. The project was evolving, becoming something larger than his initial sketches had suggested. The financial reality, however, couldn't be ignored. Even with the donated materials, there were components that had to be bought new: medical-grade sensors, specialized batteries, custom-manufactured joints. Mike found himself making hard choices, postponing his own bills, selling his beloved collection of vintage car parts, taking on extra repair jobs in the early morning hours. Sarah had offered to fund everything, of course. She'd pulled out her checkbook during their second meeting, ready to write whatever number Mike named. But he'd declined, asking only that she cover the cost of the custom-manufactured pieces they couldn't salvage or substitute. "I don't understand," she'd said, clearly puzzled. "Why make this harder than it needs to be?" Mike had struggled to explain it, but the truth was written in every donated part, every shared bit of expertise. This wasn't just about building a device anymore. It was about community, about people coming together to help a child walk again. That kind of project needed to grow from the ground up, built on foundation of shared purpose rather than purchased solutions. Now, organizing the latest batch of contributed components, Mike picked up a particularly promising servo motor. It had come from old Mr. Wilson's garage, part of an automated assembly system he'd helped design 20 years ago. The technology was dated, but the craftsmanship was exceptional, exactly the kind of reliability they needed. He added it to the growing inventory of usable parts, each one tagged and categorized according to his evolving design. The project was taking shape, not just in blueprints and sketches, but in physical form. Each piece represented a step closer to keeping his promise to Emily. Tom returned with fresh coffee, studying the organized chaos of the workbench. "You know," he said quietly, "my daughter asked me something interesting yesterday. She wanted to know why everyone was helping with Emily's project." He smiled. "I told her it's because sometimes the biggest miracles need the smallest parts." Mike nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. In his hands, a discarded robot's heart was about to help a young girl dance again. The failed prototype lay on Mike's workbench like a mechanical skeleton, its joints locked in awkward angles. 3 weeks of work reduced to a teaching moment. He ran his fingers along the frame, feeling the points where design had failed to meet reality. The metal was cold under his touch, unresponsive, nothing like the fluid, supportive structure he'd envisioned. "It's okay," Emily said from her wheelchair, her voice steady despite the disappointment he knew she must be feeling. "Thomas Edison failed thousands of times before he got the light bulb right." Mike looked up, surprised. Emily had been coming to the garage every day after school, watching him work, asking questions that showed an increasingly sophisticated understanding of the project. Somewhere along the way, she'd become less of a client and more of an apprentice. "You've been studying your history," he said, managing a smile. "Actually, I've been reading about inventors and engineering." She wheeled closer to the workbench. "Did you know that the first prosthetic limbs were made by armor makers? They used the same techniques they used for knights' gauntlets." The parallel wasn't lost on Mike. He picked up the failed joint assembly, studying how the servo motor had stripped its gears, trying to provide the necessary support. "The problem isn't just mechanical," he explained. "It's about timing and feedback. The system needs to respond to your movements instantly, but it also needs to know when to hold back." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "Like a dance partner." Mike set down the broken component, struck by her insight. He'd been thinking like a mechanic, focusing on power and precision. But a dance partner didn't just move. They listened, responded, supported. "Show me," he said, pulling out his notebook. "Show me how it should feel." Emily's face lit up. Using her hands, she demonstrated the fluid motions of a simple dance step. In ballet, your partner doesn't lift you all at once. They guide you, help you find your balance point. Then the actual lift feels almost effortless. Mike sketched rapidly, translating her gestures into mechanical concepts. The motors didn't need to do all the work. They just needed to amplify Emily's natural movement patterns, however small. The support structure could be lighter, more flexible, designed to work with her body's existing strengths rather than trying to override them. The failed prototype had taught them something else too. During their first attempt at fitting, they'd discovered that Emily had more residual muscle control than her medical records suggested. It wasn't enough for independent movement, but it was something the new design could work with. "We'll need to rebuild the sensor array," Mike said, already planning the modifications. "Make it more sensitive, better at reading your intention to move, and the frame joints need to be more like tendons than hinges, flexible but supportive." Sarah, who had been quietly observing from her usual spot near the door, stepped forward. "How long will the redesign take?" Mike met Emily's eyes, seeing the same determination he felt. "A few days to revise the plans. Maybe a week to rebuild with the new specifications." He gestured to the failed prototype. "Every mistake shows us something new. We're getting closer." Emily wheeled over to the wall where Mike had hung their project timeline. Using a marker, she drew a bold X through today's date. Thomas Edison also said that every failed attempt was just successfully finding a way that didn't work. Mike gathered up the broken components, each one a lesson learned, a step toward success. The next version would be better, lighter, more responsive, more like the dance partner Emily needed it to be. In failure, they'd found a clearer path forward. "All right then," he said, clearing space on his workbench. "Let's successfully find a few more ways that don't work. Eventually, we'll get to the one that does." The joint mechanism hummed softly. On the test bench, moving with a grace that made Mike's breath catch in his throat, After 6 iterations and countless hours of trial and error, he was watching something extraordinary, a perfect fusion of mechanical support and organic movement. The servo motor responded to the slightest input from the sensor array, providing just enough assistance without overpowering the natural motion. "It's 3 in the morning," Tom's voice came from the doorway, accompanied by the smell of fresh coffee. He'd taken to checking on Mike during his late-night delivery runs, concerned about the hours his friend was keeping. "Look at this," Mike said, not taking his eyes off the mechanism. He activated the test sequence again, watching as the joint moved through its full range of motion. "See how it anticipates the movement? The new algorithm learns from each cycle, adjusts its response time." Tom set the coffee down and leaned in for a closer look. The mechanism was beautiful in its simplicity, layers of carbon fiber and aluminum, creating a structure as light as it was strong. But it was the movement that caught the eye, smooth and natural in a way that made you forget you were watching. A machine. The robotics team's advisor was right about the predictive modeling, Mike explained, pulling up the diagnostic readouts on his laptop. Instead of just reacting to movement, it's learning to anticipate, like a real dance partner. He thought back to Emily's words about ballet partners, how they worked together to create something greater than either could achieve alone. This wasn't just an assistive device anymore, it was a collaboration between human and machine. The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source. During one of Emily's daily visits, she'd been explaining the concept of momentum in dance, how a properly timed lift made gravity feel optional. Something about her description had clicked with an old problem Mike had solved years ago, working on high-performance racing transmissions. "It's all about the timing," he muttered, scrolling through lines of code. "The power was never the issue. We just needed to get the timing perfect." The new joint design incorporated a system of micro-adjustments that occurred milliseconds before they were needed. Each sensor reading was processed through layers of learning algorithms, comparing current movements to stored patterns. The result was support that felt intuitive, almost precognitive. Mike picked up the mechanism, feeling its weight, barely. More than a pound, but strong enough to support a full range of motion. They'd tested it to 3 times the required load, and the carbon fiber frame had held without a hint of strain. "The best part," he said, showing Tom the internal structure, "is how it adapts. The more Emily uses it, the better it will understand her movement patterns. It's not just supporting her, it's learning from her." He pulled out his phone and recorded a video of the joint in action, knowing Emily would want to see it first. A thing in the morning. She'd become as invested in the technical details as he was, soaking up information about servo motors and control systems with an enthusiasm that reminded him of himself at her age. "You know what this means?" Tom asked, watching the mechanism complete another perfect cycle. Mike nodded. After weeks of setbacks and revisions, they were finally ready to build the complete system. The joint design was the last piece they'd needed. The heart of an exoskeleton that would translate Emily's smallest movements into fluid, natural motion. He began gathering the tools he'd need to replicate the mechanism for each major joint in the system. There would be 6 in total, 2 at the hips, 2 at the knees, and 2 at the ankles. Each one would work in concert with the others, creating a symphony of synchronized movement. "I should call Sarah," he said, glancing at the clock. "Let her know we're ready for the next phase." Tom raised an eyebrow. "At 3 in the morning?" Mike laughed, the sound carrying the release of weeks of tension. "Maybe not, but soon, very soon." He ran the test sequence one final time, watching the joint move with that impossible grace. In his mind, he could already see Emily taking her first steps with the completed system. Not the halting, mechanical movement of traditional medical devices, but something organic and natural, a dance of human will and mechanical precision. The coffee Tom had brought grew cold, forgotten in the excitement of breakthrough. Morning would come soon enough, bringing with it new challenges and the daunting task of scaling up their success. But for now, in the quiet hours before dawn, Mike watched his creation move and knew that some promises were meant to be kept. The leather-bound journal was Sarah's idea. "Document everything," she'd said, handing Mike the expensive notebook. "Every adjustment, every reaction, every milestone." Now, 3 weeks into testing, its pages told a story of transformation, not just of the device, but of the people around it. April 15th, Mike read from his latest entry. Adjusted ankle servos by 0.3 degrees. Response time improved to 47 milliseconds. He looked up at Emily, seated at her usual spot by the workbench. "Want to test the difference?" Emily nodded, her fingers already moving to the familiar points on the prototype frame. They'd started small, simple movements while seated, learning how the device responded to her signals. Each day brought new discoveries about what her body could still do, how even the faintest muscle tension could be amplified into meaningful motion. "Remember," Mike said, running through their standard checklist, "you're in control. The machine follows you, not the other way around." Sarah watched from her chair, her laptop forgotten on her knees. She'd rearranged her entire schedule to be present for these sessions, though Mike suspected it was as much for her own reassurance as Emily's safety. The mother's professional facade had gradually softened, replaced by cautious hope as she watched her daughter's progress. Emily closed her eyes, concentrating. The ankle joint of the prototype hummed to life, responding to her command. The movement was small, barely visible to an untrained eye, but Mike saw Sarah's sharp intake of breath. It was the first time Emily had activated that particular joint without physical contact. "Good," Mike said, keeping his voice steady despite his own excitement. "Now hold it there. Feel how the support follows your intention." He made a note in the journal. "First successful neural activation of ankle assembly. Subject shows increasing intuitive control." The technical language didn't capture the real breakthrough. The look of quiet amazement on Emily's face as she opened her eyes, the way Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for her daughter's. These moments filled the margins of the journal, written in the spaces between calibration notes and adjustment records. "Can we try standing today?" Emily asked, her voice carrying a hint of her old confidence. Mike glanced at Sarah, who nodded almost imperceptibly. They'd been building toward this moment, strengthening the connection between Emily's neural signals and the device's response patterns. The journal's pages documented every step: the first finger movements, the graduated weight tests, the hours of calibration and recalibration. "We'll take it slow," Mike said, moving to gather the safety equipment they'd prepared. "Remember what we talked about. Small steps, listen to your body." The standing frame was already positioned, its supports, ready to catch Emily if needed. But as Mike helped her move from the wheelchair, he noticed something different in her posture. The hesitation that had marked their earlier sessions was gone, replaced by a quiet determination. Sarah moved closer, her hands clasped tightly together. The room held its breath as Emily gripped the frame's handles, the exoskeleton's joints, adjusting automatically to support her weight. "Whenever you're ready," Mike said softly, his hand hovering near but not touching her back, "just like we practiced." Emily's face showed intense concentration. The servos hummed, responding to her commands. Slowly, with a grace that echoed her former dancing days, she began to straighten up. The exoskeleton moved with her, each joint providing perfect support, translating her intention into action. Mike wrote rapidly in the journal, recording voltages and response times, but his eyes never left Emily's face. This was more than a technical achievement. It was a moment of rebirth, captured in the subtle shift from doubt to possibility. For a full minute, Emily stood, supported but upright, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Sarah's professional composure finally broke as she watched her daughter achieve what countless doctors had deemed impossible. "How does it feel?" Mike asked, though the answer was written clearly in Emily's smile. Like waking up, she whispered. Like remembering who I am. Later, after Emily had returned to her wheelchair, tired but triumphant, Mike added a final note to the day's entry. Some measurements cannot be quantified. Some progress must be measured in smiles, in tears of joy, in the moment a young girl remembers she can still dance. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she held up her phone to record, the morning sun streaming through the garage's open door, creating a natural spotlight. Mike had cleared the space, pushing cars and equipment to the walls, creating a clear path from one end to the other. 20 feet had never looked so far. Systems check complete, Mike announced, reading from his diagnostic tablet. All joints responding within optimal parameters. He looked up at Emily, now fully fitted with the completed exoskeleton. Remember, we can stop any time you want. Emily nodded, her hands resting lightly on the parallel bars they'd installed. The full system was a marvel of engineering. Sleek, lightweight, almost elegant in its simplicity. Gone were the bulky prototypes and test rigs, replaced by something that looked less like a medical device and more like a dancer's costume made of carbon fiber and aluminum. I'm ready, Emily said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. She had insisted on wearing her old ballet slippers for this test, a touch of pink against the metallic frame that made Sarah's heart ache with memory and hope. Mike positioned himself on one side of the bars, while Tom stood ready on the other. They had rehearsed this dozens of times in segments, but never the full sequence. The video recording would serve multiple purposes: documentation for their records, proof of concept for potential funding, and most importantly, a moment that none of them would ever forget. Emily closed her eyes, centering herself the way she used to before a dance recital. When she opened them, something had shifted in her expression, determination replacing nervousness, possibility overshadowing fear. The first step was the hardest. Every muscle movement, every neural signal had to be precise. The exoskeleton hummed to life, responding to her commands with the fluidity they'd spent months perfecting. Her right foot lifted, moved forward, planted. The left followed, natural as breathing. Perfect, Mike murmured, watching the real-time diagnostics. The adaptive algorithms are matching your rhythm beautifully. Step by step, Emily moved forward. Each movement was deliberate, but increasingly confident. The exoskeleton learned and adjusted with her, becoming less a support system and more an extension of her own body. By the halfway point, tears were streaming down Sarah's face, but her phone remained steady, capturing every precious second. 10 feet, 12, 15. Emily's steps grew more assured, her body remembering patterns it had never truly forgotten. The sunlight caught the metal frame, creating halos of reflected light that danced around her as she moved. "Mom!" Emily called, her voice thick with emotion but still moving forward. "Are you watching?" "Every step, baby," Sarah managed, her free hand pressed against her heart. Every single step. At 18 feet, Emily paused, and for a moment, Mike tensed, ready to step in. But she wasn't stopping. She was adjusting her position, shifting, her weight in a way he recognized from her descriptions of ballet movements. "Emily," he started, "maybe we should keep it simple for the first." But she was already moving, her body flowing into a simple turn, the exoskeleton responding perfectly. To her lead, it wasn't a pirouette, not yet, but it was a dance step, unmistakable and beautiful in its execution. The garage erupted in gasps and exclamations, Tom's quiet holy smokes mixing with Sarah's sob of joy. Emily completed her turn and finished the final 2 steps, coming to rest at the end of the course. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound, the quiet hum of servos and the soft whir of Sarah's phone still recording. Then Emily looked up, her face radiant with triumph and possibility. "Can we do it again?" Mike checked the diagnostics, but he already knew what they would show. Every system had performed flawlessly, each component working in perfect harmony with Emily's movements. The months of work, the countless revisions and refinements had led to this moment. "Let's take a short break first," he said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "Let the batteries recharge. Besides," he gestured to Sarah, who was simultaneously trying to save the video and wipe her eyes, "I think your mom might need a minute." Sarah lowered her phone at last, the precious video safely stored. She moved to embrace her daughter, careful of the framework that had just given them both a miracle. "My beautiful dancer," she whispered. Emily hugged her back, standing tall and unsupported. "Mom," she said, her voice full of wonder and determination, "I want to learn that new routine now, the one we saw in the video last week." Mike made a note on his tablet, already thinking about the adjustments they'd need for more complex movements. But for now, he simply watched mother and daughter holding each other, their shadows merging in the morning light, while the video recording preserved their first steps into a future none of them had dared to imagine. The local newspaper article lay on Mike's workbench, its headline bold against the morning light, "Local mechanic helps young girl walk again." Below it, a photograph showed Emily standing in the exoskeleton, her ballet slippers clearly visible. Beneath the carbon fiber frame, Mike hadn't wanted publicity, but once Sarah shared the video with Emily's medical team, there was no keeping it quiet. "3 more interview requests this morning," Tom said, sorting through the mail he'd brought. 2 from medical journals and 1 from a national morning show." He paused, studying Mike's expression. "You can't hide from this forever, you know." Mike continued adjusting the ankle servo on his workbench, more for the comfort of familiar routine than any real need. "I'm not hiding, I'm working. Emily's next performance evaluation is in 2 days, and I want everything perfect." The article had sparked something neither of them had anticipated. Within hours of publication, the garage's phone had started ringing. Parents of children with mobility issues, veterans with spinal injuries, rehabilitation centers seeking information. Each call carried the same desperate hope that had first brought Sarah to his door. "You should see the online comments," Emily said from her usual spot, her tablet propped on her knees. She'd taken to monitoring the stories spread across social media, equal parts amused and moved by the public response. "People are calling you a miracle worker." Mike set down his tools with a sigh. "No miracles here, just engineering and a lot of help from a very determined young lady." He nodded toward Emily, who was already standing up, the exoskeleton responding to her movements with practiced ease. The newspaper had gotten that part right, at least. Their reporter had spent hours in the garage, watching Emily work with the device, interviewing them both about the development process. The article emphasized the collaborative nature of the project, how Emily's understanding of dance had influenced the design as much as Mike's mechanical expertise. "Montgomery Technologies' stock is up 12 points since the story broke," Sarah announced, entering the garage with her usual grace but unusual excitement. "Our board is very interested in the potential applications." Mike felt a familiar tension creep into his shoulders. He'd known this was coming, the inevitable push to commercialize, to scale up, to turn their unique solution into something marketable. Sarah had been careful not to push, understanding his reluctance to rush into mass production. "I told them we're focusing on perfecting the current design," she continued, sensing his discomfort. "But Mike, people need this, what we've created. Here, it could change lives." Emily moved across the garage in a series of smooth steps that would have seemed impossible just months ago. "Show them the new video," she suggested. "The one from yesterday's practice." Mike pulled up the footage on his laptop. In it, Emily wasn't just walking, she was dancing. Simple movements still, but undeniably dance steps, each one executed with growing confidence and grace. The exoskeleton had become an extension of her body, responding to her intentions almost, before she consciously formed them. The article had tried to explain the technical aspects, the adaptive learning algorithms, the neural interface, the lightweight but durable construction. But watching Emily dance, Mike knew the real story wasn't in the engineering specifications. It was in the moment when technology and human spirit merged to overcome what everyone else had deemed impossible. More calls coming in, Tom reported, checking the garage's phone, including one from a children's hospital in Boston. They're interested in setting up a trial program. Mike looked around his garage, at the workbench where it had all started, at the walls now covered with technical drawings and progress charts, at Emily moving with recovered confidence, at Sarah watching her daughter with quiet joy. The newspaper article had changed something, pushed their private miracle into the public eye. "Maybe," he said slowly, "we should think about setting up a proper workshop, something bigger than my garage." He picked up the article, reading again, about the hope their story had sparked. "But we do it our way, each device custom-built, each person treated as an individual, not a product line." Emily executed a perfect turn, then smiled at him. "We could help a lot of people learn to dance again." The morning sun caught the edge of the newspaper, highlighting the final line of the article. "Sometimes the greatest innovations come not from giant corporations or research facilities, but from a simple garage where someone dared to say, 'I can help.'" The business proposal sat unopened on Mike's desk, its glossy cover embossed with the logo of one of the world's largest medical device manufacturers. Inside lay 40 pages of projections, promises, and very large numbers, a future mapped out in spreadsheets and market analyses. He'd been staring at it for an hour, his coffee growing cold beside it. "You haven't opened it yet, have you?" Sarah stood in the doorway of his newly expanded workshop, looking more like the CEO she was than the worried mother he'd first met. The success of Emily's exoskeleton had transformed both their lives, but in very different ways. "Been a little busy," Mike replied, gesturing to the 3 prototype frames hanging on the wall. Each represented an adaptation of Emily's design, modified for different needs. A veteran with a spinal injury, a child with cerebral palsy, an elderly man recovering from a stroke. These people aren't spreadsheets, Sarah. They're not market segments. She moved into the room, picking up the proposal. "No, they're not. But they are people who need help. More people than you can serve from this workshop, no matter how many hours you work." She placed the document back on his desk. "Open this time. At least read what they're offering." The numbers were staggering. Full manufacturing support, worldwide distribution, research and development budgets that could fund innovations he'd only dreamed about. The company wanted to market the exoskeleton as a revolutionary breakthrough in mobility assistance, with Mike heading their new adaptive technology division. "They're talking about streamlining the design," he said, pointing to a paragraph he'd skimmed earlier. "Standardizing components, creating size categories instead of custom fits." The very thought made his stomach turn. That's not how this works. Every person's needs are different. Every solution has to be custom, Sarah finished. "I know, but think about Emily's evaluation yesterday. Remember what Dr. Chen said?" Mike did remember. The neurologist had been amazed by Emily's progress, particularly how the exoskeleton had adapted to her increasing strength and control. "The device isn't just supporting her movement," he had explained. "It's encouraging her nervous system to form new pathways. It's not just compensating for the injury, it's helping her heal. The point is," Sarah continued, "there are thousands of people who could benefit from this technology. The question isn't whether to expand production, it's how to do it, without losing what makes it special." She had a point. The waiting list for consultations was growing daily, despite their best efforts to keep up. Tom had quit his delivery job to help with administration, and the high school robotics team had practically moved in, eager to learn and assist with basic assembly. But it wasn't enough. Mike picked up a component from his desk, a servo motor, housing he'd modified for their latest client, a young artist with muscular dystrophy. The changes were subtle but crucial, allowing for smoother brush strokes and better fine motor control. How could you mass-produce something that required such individual attention? "I've been thinking," Sarah said, sensing his struggle. "What if we counter-proposed? Instead of selling the technology, we create a network of workshops. Train other mechanics and engineers in your methods. Maintain direct oversight of each case." She smiled. "Not everyone has your gift, but they can learn your approach." The idea stirred something in Mike's mind. He thought of his father's toolbox, how each tool had to be learned, its proper use understood through practice and patience. Maybe the same principle could apply here. "It would be slower," he warned, "more expensive. The shareholders won't like it." "Let me worry about the shareholders," Sarah replied, with a confidence that reminded him why she ran a successful tech company. "You worry about maintaining the quality and integrity of what we've built." Emily's voice carried from the main workshop area, where she was helping their newest client adjust to his exoskeleton. Her laughter mixed with the hum of servos and the quiet conversation of the robotics team working on calibrations. Mike stood, decision made. He picked up the corporate proposal and dropped it in his recycling bin. "Okay," he said, "let's draft our own proposal. But I want one thing clear from the start. We're not building products. We're building partnerships with our clients and with the people who'll help us serve them." Sarah nodded, already pulling out her tablet to take notes. "I think I know just how to pitch it. The Harrison method, where technology meets humanity." Through the window, Mike could see Emily demonstrating a simple movement sequence to their new client, her exoskeleton gleaming in the afternoon light. Some things, he realized, were too precious to mass-produce. Some innovations needed to grow slowly, carefully, one life-changing step at a time. The damaged control board lay on Mike's workbench like a fallen soldier, its circuitry exposed and lifeless. What had started as a minor glitch during Emily's rehearsal had cascaded into a complete system failure. Now, 3 days before her scheduled dance recital, the exoskeleton's primary neural interface was dead. "Can you fix it?" Emily asked. She sat in her wheelchair, a backup they'd kept but rarely needed anymore, trying to mask her worry. With forced calm, the question hung in the air, heavy with months of progress and hope. Mike examined the board under his magnifying lamp, tracing the pattern of burnt-out components. The failure wasn't in his custom modifications, but in the core processor itself, a specialized chip that had taken weeks to source originally. "The hardware is definitely fried," he admitted, "and the replacement part, it's not something I can fabricate here." He looked up at Sarah, who was already on her phone, typing rapidly. "How fast can your suppliers—" "2 weeks minimum," she interrupted, her face tightening with frustration. "There's a worldwide shortage, even with our corporate connections. The fastest delivery estimate is 14 days. Emily's hands clenched in her lap, but her voice remained steady. "The recital is Saturday." The significance wasn't lost on any of them. This wasn't just another performance. It was to be Emily's public debut, her first time dancing for an audience since the accident. More than that, it was meant to demonstrate the exoskeleton's potential to the medical community. Doctors and rehabilitation specialists from 3 states had arranged to attend. "What about the prototype boards?" Tom suggested from his usual spot by the door. "The ones we used during development." Mike shook his head. "They're not compatible with the current software. The adaptive algorithms need the processing power of the new chip." He picked up the damaged board, mind racing through alternatives. "If we tried to run it on older hardware, we'd lose all the learned movement patterns, all the fine control Emily's developed." The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of the robotics team working in the new assembly area. They'd come so far, helped so many people, yet here they were, stopped cold by a single component failure. Sarah's phone buzzed. "The German supplier says they might be able to expedite for an additional $50,000. Her tone made it clear that price wasn't the issue, but they still can't guarantee delivery before next week. Emily wheeled herself to the workbench, picking up her notebook, the one where she'd been documenting her own progress, combining technical notes with choreography diagrams. What if she hesitated, then continued with growing confidence? What if we simplified things? Used the old board but wrote new routines specifically for its limitations? Mike blinked, surprised by the suggestion. You'd have to relearn. All the control patterns, the movements wouldn't be as smooth, as natural. I don't need perfect, Emily said, her chin lifting with determination. I just need possible. Besides, she smiled slightly, a good dancer adapts to their partner's capabilities. The idea took root in Mike's mind. They could strip down the software, focus on the essential movement patterns Emily would need for her routine. It wouldn't have the fluid grace of the full system, but with Emily's skill and determination, it would mean long hours, he warned. Reprogramming, recalibrating, lots of practice time. Then we better get started. Emily was already opening her notebook to a fresh page. I'll modify the choreography while you work on the board. Simple movements, nothing too complex, like going back to basics in ballet. Sarah watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. Are you sure about this, honey? We could postpone the recital, wait for the new part. No. Emily's response was immediate. This isn't just about me anymore. Remember what Dr. Chen said. There are people counting on this demonstration, people who need to see what's possible. She turned to Mike. Can we do it? Mike picked up the old prototype board, remembering the late nights they'd spent getting it to work the first time. It wasn't elegant, but it was reliable. Sometimes, he reflected, the best solutions weren't the most advanced. They were the ones that matched the determination of the people using them. Yes, he said finally, we can do it. It won't be what we planned, but it will be real, Emily finished. And sometimes that's better than perfect. The new design schematics covered Mike's entire workbench, each page representing hours of rapid innovation born from necessity. What had started as a setback was transforming into something unexpected, a simpler but somehow more elegant solution. The robotics team had stayed late into the night, their excitement growing as the new approach took shape. It's like writing haiku instead of an epic poem, Emily explained to Dr. Chen, who had rushed over when he heard about the component failure. Every movement has to matter, has to serve a purpose. She demonstrated a modified turn, the old prototype, board responding with less fluidity but greater precision. Mike adjusted a connection in the rebuilt control system, watching the diagnostic readouts carefully. They'd stripped away layers of complexity, focusing on the essential communication between Emily's neural signals and the exoskeleton's responses. The result was surprisingly effective. See how the power curve changes? He showed Dr. Chen the readings. Instead of trying to smooth out every micro-movement, we're amplifying the intentional ones. Emily does more of the control work, but the support is more targeted. The neurologist leaned forward, fascination replacing his initial concern. You're not just working around the hardware limitations, he realized. You're actually encouraging more active neuromuscular engagement. This could have therapeutic benefits we hadn't considered. Sarah entered the workshop carrying fresh coffee for the team, her business attire replaced by casual clothes that showed traces of solder and carbon fiber dust. She'd been working alongside them, her executive skills turning to project management. As they raced against time, the simplified interface is easier to replicate too, she added, setting down the coffee. Tom's already adapted the basic framework for 2 other clients. She smiled at her daughter. Sometimes limitations breed innovation. Emily moved through another sequence of steps, her face showing intense concentration. The movements weren't as graceful as before, but they carried a new quality, a deliberate precision that spoke of hard-won control rather than technological assistance. It's actually helping me understand the movements better, she said, in pausing to make a note in her choreography journal. Before, the system did so much of the work automatically that I didn't always think about the details. Now I have to be more conscious of every step. The robotics team's youngest member, Lisa, looked up from her coding station. We've finished the modified gesture recognition algorithms. They're running 30% faster on the old hardware, now that we've optimized them. Mike nodded approvingly. The kids had thrown themselves into the challenge, their fresh perspectives helping to solve problems that had initially seemed insurmountable. When Lisa had suggested treating each movement as a discrete signal, rather than part of a continuous flow, it had opened up entirely new possibilities. "Ready to try the new dance sequence?" he asked Emily, running one final diagnostic check. She positioned herself at the starting point they'd marked on the floor. The past 2 days had been a blur of adjustments and practice sessions, each hour, bringing them closer to their goal. The recital was now just 24 hours away. As Emily began to move, everyone in the workshop fell silent. The exoskeleton responded to her commands with a different kind of grace, less fluid but more precise, each movement flowing from clear intention rather than algorithmic interpolation. When she completed the sequence with a modified turn that hadn't been possible with the original system, Dr. Chen broke into spontaneous applause. "Remarkable," he said, making rapid notes in his tablet. "The level of control you've developed. This could revolutionize our approach to neural rehabilitation." Mike saved the final calibration settings, feeling a familiar surge of satisfaction. They hadn't just solved a problem. They'd discovered something new, something that might help even more people than their original design. "We should document everything," Sarah said, already thinking ahead. The simplified architecture, the enhanced neural engagement, the therapeutic implications. This could be a whole new direction for the project. Emily completed another practice sequence, then looked at her reflection in the workshop's window. "It's different," she admitted. "Not what we planned, but..." She smiled, executing a perfect stop that would have been challenging even with the advanced system. "Sometimes the best dances are the ones where you can see the dancers work, not just the final effect." Mike gathered up the schematics, each page representing a piece of their rushed but inspired innovation. They had turned a crisis into an opportunity, stripped away complexity to find a deeper truth about the connection between human and machine. Tomorrow, they would show the world not just what technology could do, but what the human spirit could achieve when pushed to adapt and overcome. "All right," he said, checking the time. "One more full rehearsal, then everyone gets some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." The presentation slides glowed on Mike's laptop screen, each one documenting a step in their journey. Technical specifications, progress charts, and medical data were interspersed with photographs showing Emily's transformation from tentative first steps to confident movement. But it was the final slide that held his attention, a simple video icon waiting to capture what would happen next. The small auditorium at the rehabilitation center was filled to capacity. Medical professionals from across the country sat alongside potential investors and, most importantly, families of children with mobility challenges. Sarah stood at the podium, her CEO persona firmly in place as she introduced their project. "What you're about to see isn't just a technological breakthrough," she was saying. "It's a demonstration of what happens when we dare to rethink our assumptions about disability and human potential." Behind the stage curtain, Emily took slow breaths running through her warm-up routine. The simplified exoskeleton responded to each small movement, its mechanisms barely audible. Mike knelt beside her, running one final diagnostic check. "Everything's perfect," he assured her, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. The old control board was functioning at its limits, pushed to perform beyond its original specifications. But over the past 3 days, they discovered that perfect wasn't always necessary for remarkable. "I know," Emily smiled, adjusting her dance costume, designed to showcase rather than hide the exoskeleton. "It's not about perfect anymore. It's about possible." Dr. Chen joined them backstage, his usual clinical reserve replaced by barely contained excitement. "The preliminary data from your new approach is fascinating," he whispered. "The increased neural engagement, the adaptive learning pattern, we're seeing evidence of actual nervous system regeneration." Mike nodded, but his focus remained. On Emily, they'd simplified the dance routine, yes, but had also made it more demanding in terms of precise control. Each movement would demonstrate not just the technology's capabilities, but Emily's growing mastery over her own body. Sarah's voice carried from the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my daughter, Emily Montgomery." The curtain rose. Emily moved forward in her wheelchair, her entrance choreographed to show the contrast between before and after. The audience sat in respectful silence, medical professionals leaning forward with clinical interest, parents holding their breath in hope. Mike started the recording software, knowing that every moment would need to be documented. Then Emily stood, and the real demonstration began. The first movements were deliberate, each one chosen to showcase the exoskeleton's response to neural signals. Emily had insisted on starting with basic ballet positions, demonstrating how the device could handle precise, controlled motions. The audience murmured as she moved through the sequence with growing confidence. Dr. Chen whispered rapid observations into his recorder. "Notice the proprioceptive feedback loop, the way the system amplifies existing neural pathways rather than bypassing them. This isn't just assistive technology, it's therapeutic." But it was the dance itself that captured everyone's attention. Emily had choreographed it to tell their story. The initial uncertainty, the gradual building of trust. Between human and machine, the breakthrough moments of discovery. Where the original system would have provided fluid, automatic support, this version required her to work with the technology, creating a performance that showed both the challenge and the triumph. Mike watched the diagnostic readouts, but found himself drawn more to the faces in the audience. Medical professionals were scribbling rapid notes, yes, but it was the expressions of the parents that told the real story. He saw hope kindling in their eyes, possibilities awakening where there had been resignation. The final sequence was Emily's own creation, a series of movements that would have been impossible with either the old system or the new one alone, but became achievable through their perfect partnership. As she finished with a controlled spin and bow, the audience erupted in applause. Sarah was the first to her feet, professional composure forgotten in maternal pride. Dr. Chen was already surrounded by colleagues, gesturing animatedly as he explained the therapeutic implications. But Mike's attention was on the families making their way toward the stage, each carrying questions and renewed hope. Emily rolled her shoulders, letting the exoskeleton power down slowly. "Did we get everything recorded?" she asked, her face flushed with exertion and triumph. Mike nodded, saving the presentation data that would be shared with medical institutions across the country. They had documented more than just technical specifications and performance metrics. They had captured the moment when limitation transformed into possibility. "You know," he said, watching the first parents reach the stage, "I think this is just the beginning." Emily smiled, already turning to greet a young girl in a wheelchair whose eyes shone with newfound hope. "Good," she said, "because I have so many more dances to learn." The foundation documents were spread across the conference room table in Sarah's office, their crisp legal language outlining a future Mike had never imagined for himself. The Sarah Montgomery Foundation for Adaptive Technology, the header. Read, followed by pages of purpose statements, organizational structures, and funding commitments. "It's more than just a research center," Sarah explained, highlighting key sections. "It's a training facility, a manufacturing hub, and most importantly, a place where people can come to find hope." She paused, watching Mike's expression carefully. "We've already received pledges for the first year's operating costs." Mike picked up the architectural renderings, a modern facility built around his workshop's principles, with spaces designed for both innovation and rehabilitation. The plans showed individual consultation rooms, a dance studio, engineering labs, and most importantly, a large central workspace where mechanics and medical professionals could collaborate. Dr. Chen has agreed to head the medical advisory board, Sarah continued, and the robotics team. Well, Lisa asked if we could create an internship program. Apparently half her class wants to sign up. The success of Emily's presentation had unleashed a flood of interest and support. Medical journals were requesting detailed studies, hospitals wanted to establish partnership programs, and most significantly, families were reaching out from across the country, asking for help. "What about your company?" Mike asked, knowing how much time Sarah had already invested in their project. "Won't this take you away from Montgomery Technologies?" Sarah smiled, pulling out another document. "Actually, the board voted yesterday. We're establishing a dedicated medical technology division, with the Foundation as its primary research partner." Her expression softened. "Some things are more important than quarterly profits." Emily wheeled into the room, now moving smoothly, between her chair and the exoskeleton as needed. She carried a stack of letters, the latest batch of requests from families who had seen videos of her dance performance. "I've been thinking," she said, placing the letters on the table. "What if we made the Foundation about more than just the technology? What if we created a place where people could learn to dance again, whatever that means for them?" Mike picked up one of the letters, reading the hope between its lines. Each story was different, but they all shared the same dream, the desire to move, to participate, to live fully, despite physical limitations. "The simplified design we created for the recital," he said slowly, ideas forming. "It taught us something important. Sometimes the best solution isn't the most advanced one, it's the one that works best with what each person can do." Sarah nodded, flipping to the Foundation's mission statement. "That's why we want you to direct the technical program, not just overseeing production, but training others in your approach. Building a team that understands it's not about the technology alone, but about the partnership between human and machine." The scope of the proposition was daunting. Mike had spent his life working alone, solving problems one at a time in his own way. But looking at the letters, the architectural plans, the eager faces of mother and daughter, he saw something bigger than himself. "We'll need to maintain the personal touch," he said, already thinking through the challenges. "No assembly lines, no one-size-fits-all solutions, each case treated as unique." "Already covered," Sarah replied, pointing to a section of the documentation. "The Foundation's charter specifically requires individual assessment and customization. We're not looking to mass-produce mobility. We're creating a place where each person can find their own way to move." Emily had moved to the windows, practicing small dance movements as she looked out over the city. The exoskeleton responded to her commands with the precise, intentional motions they had discovered during their rushed innovation. What had seemed like a setback had shown them a new path forward. "There's something else," Sarah said, pulling out a final document, "the patent applications. We'd like to file them jointly, listing both you and Emily as co-inventors. The technology will belong to the Foundation, used only in ways that align with our mission." Mike thought of his father's toolbox, of the lessons it had taught him about fixing things, about helping people. This was a different kind of repair work, but the principles were the same. Understanding the problem, finding the right tools, never giving up until the job was done right. "When can we start?" he asked, reaching for a pen. Emily turned from the window, her face bright with possibility. "We already have. Every person we help becomes part of something bigger, a community of people learning to dance their own way." Mike signed the documents, each signature a step into a future he hadn't imagined, but now couldn't resist. The Foundation would be more than a building, more than a program. It would be a place where technology and humanity met, where limitations became possibilities, where each small victory added to a larger dream of movement and freedom. The wall of letters had become a fixture in the Foundation's main workshop, each one telling a story of transformation. Mike paused before them during his morning rounds, coffee in hand, reading a newly posted note from a young artist who had regained the ability to paint. The letter included a small watercolor, a sunrise, painted with the help of her customized mobility device. 3 more success stories this morning, Tom announced, walking in with his tablet. He'd evolved from administrative assistant to program coordinator, helping to manage the growing network of workshops they'd established. The Seattle Center just helped a violinist return to performing, and our Houston team has 2 new kids taking their first steps. The Foundation's approach had proven more successful than any of them had imagined. By combining Mike's philosophy of personalized solutions with Sarah's organizational skills and Emily's insights into movement, they'd created something unique in the medical technology field. "Did you see this one?" Emily wheeled over, pointing to a letter decorated with dance steps. "She's 12, just like I was. Her mother said she used to watch my demonstration video every night before bed." She smiled, touching the paper gently. "Now she's choreographing her own routines." The workshop hummed with activity around them. The robotics team, now a formal training program, worked at their stations, each learning to combine technical expertise with the human touch that made their approach special. Dr. Chen moved between projects, offering medical insights and documenting the therapeutic benefits they continued to discover. "The new training center opens next month," Sarah said, joining them with fresh coffee for everyone. "We've got mechanics and engineers coming from 6 countries to learn the Harrison method." She grinned at Mike's slight grimace at the name. "Hey, you're the one who insisted every device should be as unique as the person using it. Now people want to learn how you do it." Mike watched a veteran working with one of their senior technicians, calibrating a new exoskeleton design. The GC man had lost both legs in combat, but now he moved with a fluid grace that spoke of hours of practice and perfect customization. More importantly, he was smiling, joking with the tech as they made minor adjustments. "Lisa's team finished the new sensor array," Emily reported, referring to their former high school intern who now headed their research division. "It's even better at reading subtle muscle signals. They think it might help people with more severe mobility limitations." The letters on the wall testified to their growing impact. Children taking their first steps, athletes returning to their sports, elderly people regaining independence. Each story was different, each solution unique, but they all shared the same thread of renewed hope and possibility. "Remember this one?" Tom asked, pointing to an early letter, its paper slightly faded. It was from their first client after Emily, a painter with Parkinson's disease who had thought her art days were over. The letter was accompanied by a small abstract piece, its bold strokes belying the tremors that had threatened to silence her creativity. "That was when we knew this was bigger than us," Sarah said softly. "When we realized how many different ways people needed to move, to express themselves, to live fully." They had expanded thoughtfully, carefully, never compromising their core principle of individual attention. Each new workshop was staffed by people trained not just in the technical aspects, but in the human approach that made their work special. The Foundation's waiting list was long, but they refused to rush or standardize their process. A new family arrived for their initial consultation, parents with a young boy who dreamed of playing soccer. Mike watched Emily greet them, saw how she put them at ease by demonstrating her own device, showing them what was possible. "You know what I love most about these letters?" Emily said later, as they reviewed plans for the next generation of devices. "It's not just thank yous from the people we've helped. It's stories about what they've gone on to do, who they've inspired, how they're helping others believe in possibilities again." Mike nodded, understanding completely. The wall of letters wasn't just a record of past successes, it was a growing testament to the ripple effect of hope. Each story touching others, inspiring more dreams, more innovations, more moments of triumph. "Speaking of possibilities," Sarah interjected, checking her watch, "isn't it time for your rehearsal? The spring showcase is in 2 weeks. Emily's face lit up. She'd continued dancing, each performance pushing the boundaries of what their technology could do, each routine inspiring others to find their own ways to move. The showcase would feature several foundation clients, each telling their story through movement. Mike picked up his tools, ready for another day of creating possibilities. The letters would continue to arrive, each one a reminder that their work was about more than technology. It was about helping people write new chapters in their own stories of hope and determination. The new sign gleamed in the morning sun. Harrison Mobility Solutions, a division of the Sarah Montgomery Foundation. Mike stood in the parking lot of the expanded workshop, his father's old toolbox in his hands, remembering another morning. Years ago, when a desperate mother and her daughter had first arrived looking for hope. "Perfect timing," Sarah called, walking up with Emily. "The film crew will be here in an hour to document our 100th successful adaptation." She squeezed her daughter's shoulder proudly. "Ready for your interview, Dr. Montgomery?" Emily smiled at the title. Her experiences had led her to study biomedical engineering, focusing on adaptive technology and movement therapy. Now she split her time between research, teaching, and dancing, each role informing the others. "The original garage is still my favorite place," Emily said, wheeling toward the building's entrance. She switched smoothly to her latest exoskeleton model, a testament to their continuing innovation. "It reminds me of that first day when you said you could help me walk." Mike set his father's toolbox on his new workbench, still his preferred spot despite the modern facility around them. The tools inside had helped build hundreds of custom devices, each one tailored to someone's specific dreams of movement. "Remember what your father used to say?" Tom asked, arriving with their morning coffee ritual. "Everything can be fixed if you've got the right tools and enough heart." The workshop was filling with their usual morning activity. Technicians calibrated devices while clients practiced movements. The robotics training program was in full swing, young engineers learning to combine technical skill with compassionate understanding. Dr. Chen led his medical residents through evaluations, teaching them to see possibilities rather than limitations. "I got another letter from that ballet school in Chicago," Emily mentioned, pulling up a video on her tablet. 3 of their students are using our devices now. They're planning a showcase performance next month. The video showed young dancers moving with grace and determination, their exoskeletons becoming part of their artistic expression rather than merely assistive devices. Each one had been customized not just for mobility, but for the specific demands of dance. "Speaking of performances," Sarah added, "the Foundation's annual benefit is almost sold out. Seems everyone wants to see the new piece you've choreographed." Emily had become known for pushing the boundaries of what adaptive technology could achieve, each performance demonstrating new possibilities. More importantly, she had inspired others to find their own ways to move, to express, to live fully. Mike opened his toolbox, fingers finding familiar tools among newer additions. Each represented a problem solved, a barrier overcome, a life changed. The Foundation had grown beyond anything he'd imagined, but its heart remained the same, one person helping another find their way forward. "You know what I realized," Emily said, practicing a new movement sequence. "That first prototype wasn't really about walking. It was about believing that limitations aren't permanent, that there's always another way if you're willing to look for it." Sarah watched her daughter dance, her eyes bright with memory and pride. "And now you're helping others find their way." The morning sun streamed through the workshop windows, catching the new sign's lettering. Below the formal name, smaller text read, "Where technology meets humanity." It wasn't just a slogan. It was a promise they renewed with each person who came through their doors. "Time to get started," Mike said, selecting a wrench from his father's toolbox. "We've got people waiting to dance." Emily moved to greet their first clients of the day, her exoskeleton responding with fluid grace to her movements. Sarah headed to her office to manage the Foundation's growing initiatives, Tom began his rounds, ensuring each project had the support it needed. And Mike stood for a moment longer, remembering that first morning when he dared to say, "I can help." The words had changed not just Emily's life, but countless others. More importantly, they had revealed a truth he now shared with every new client. Within every limitation lay the seed of possibility, waiting for the right combination of technology, determination, and heart to help it grow.